Okay, good evening, everyone, on this lovely Tuesday evening, nice and warm. Let me just put a comment in here. Uh, see if it works. No, that doesn't work. Hold on. Let's see what happens here this evening. Okay, let's see if that works this evening. Right. Okay, let's just show that in terms of moral injury. So it's a welcome for you this evening. I'm just waiting for my sound engineer to do what she needs to do. Just let me know that she's up and running, and I'm going to put this in Facebook. There you go. Good. Good evening. Well, looks like YouTube is on it. So thank you, Sonia. I'm going to continue. For me, one person's there. I've lost a few seconds. Anyway, welcome this evening to another session on moral injury. It seems to be kind of captivating my life, but also captivating other people's lives as well. So welcome this evening. My name is Delroy Hall, based in the north of England. I'm a trained psychotherapist, teacher, trainer for over 30 years. And I've been doing the broadcast now for 4 years, just over 4 years now. Started during lockdown, and I never thought I'd still be doing it. And I thought I'd do it each week, but then it's become kind of serious. So I'm doing it with a bit more gusto. So we're looking at recovery from moral injury, shaken but not broken. However, I've got to admit that some people are shaken and are broken, but that's another session for another week. So I'm going to begin. I think I'm also on Facebook. So if anybody is on Facebook and they can send me a message, please do. I've just seen a notice come up about community standards, what happened last time, but I'm not doing anything wrong or immoral as far as I know. So I'll leave it with Facebook and let's see what happens. Anyway, some of us who've watched the but also just to say welcome if you're watching on catch up, and if you're here for the first time, just busy scrolling, and you've heard about what I'm doing, excuse me, and you're here for the first time, welcome. So moral injury, I've been looking at it now for the past 4 or 5 months. It's given voice to individuals who've been experiencing real difficulties at work, and as you see on YouTube, but also on the screen. It says moral injury is understood to be the strong cognitive and emotional response that can occur following events that violate a person's moral or ethical code. That's from the Lancet, from the psychiatry division of the medical world. Let me just hide that. Ooh, hold on. Okay. Right. So shaken, not stirred is the way that James Bond asked for his martinis. And I was thinking about moral injury and also talking to people who've experienced it. Shaken, not stirred, that's what he says. However, the experience of moral injury shakes people, it rattles people, and it rattles people to the very core. And as I said right at the beginning, some people are broken and they never, ever recover. So there is no doubt, as I said before, moral injury really does rock people. It's life-altering. And some schools of thought say it is soul-shattering, which is giving you the indication this is not just a walk in the park being dismissed, but it's a whole context that has actually affected this person negatively. So not only are people shaken, but the stirring. But I also wanted to talk about stirring, taken from the work of Katie Sander. Interestingly, she spoke about the existential stirring. She spoke about stirring as the transition from one context or one job to another. And I think, as I've been reflecting on moral injury, and as horrible as it is, and speaking to individuals, I wonder whether it's almost like a personal earthquake that rocks things up so much in our lives. And even though some of the events that have happened, the external events have been very, very difficult, but I just wonder whether it's something that rocks us out of our comfort zone for us to take a really good look at our lives and do something meaningful. There's a book I've mentioned before called Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. Fantastic book. Short book, but it speaks volumes about how we live our lives. And what we do quite often, we tell our lives how it should be, but the life itself is wanting expression. I see that often when I was working at the university, how many students ended up doing degrees which was suggested to them by their parent or their careers teacher. They had lost their voice in the process, so they ended up doing degrees which their heart was never in. And it's later on sometimes in life when there's redundancy. I remember talking to somebody years ago. She was in her early 50s and she took redundancy, or she made a post made redundant, and she said, Delroy, it's the opportunity now to go back to university and do what I always wanted to do, and that was art. So for X amount of years, she'd worked in this job. And I think many people, they work in the job to fulfill a whole range of other people's expectations, but their heart and desire is elsewhere. So I just wonder whether moral injury, by a real quirky sense of nature, has enabled people to look at other things. So she said, week after week, I'm talking with men and women in their 20s and 30s, these young people who are searching for meaning in their work and life. They are grateful for their job and they want to be accomplished, but they feel a pull towards something else. And quite, oh, thank you. Brilliant. So it looks like I'm on Facebook. So if you want to do Facebook, you want to engage. Yep, they are. Yep, looks like we're in action, even though it's on two screens. Thank you for that, Saffron. Really appreciate it. So, that means that other people then can see it as well. So that's really great. So, people, if you want to ask a question, I've got one eye. I've got two screens, so I've got one eye on another screen. So it looks like we're in action after so many weeks of messing about. So I wanted to kind of play around with the idea of moral injury. And I think if I was working with somebody and I understood it was moral injury, I wouldn't be saying that to them in the first session. At some point, when there's a kind of a settling, that's the time I might be suggesting to them in terms of meaning. But also, talking with a friend of mine, I said to her some time ago, she'd experienced moral injury. I said to her, do you believe that you should have left your place long before that? She said, she paused, said yes. And then went on to say what the place was like, but she was comfortable, cruising. Why should she change, even though she knows she should change? So I just wonder whether sometimes the writing's on the wall, sometimes there's urges, there's a little voice telling us it's time to move on, but for a whole range of reasons, we stay, and sometimes to our displeasure. One of the things I say, one of life's guarantees, that all of us will experience some shattering moments in our life, not necessarily moral injury, but we all experience shattering moments in our lives. And it's about trying to understand what takes place and how we can manage it. And I want to kind of trip into the construction world. I remembered doing physics as a kid in school, and I was taught, I think we were doing forces, and we were taught that buildings, tall skyscrapers, they move. And it was a shock to all of us. I'd never heard of such thing. But sure enough, that's what happens. So I'm going to be, it sounds like I'm going a bit off track at the moment, but I'm not. I really am kind of wanting to focus on shaken but not broken. And what is it do we have that can really draw on our resources to help us navigate our plot through moral injury? So, an article that talks about that Japan got some of the tallest buildings in the world, but also it's the most prone in terms of earthquakes. So I'm going to say a little bit about it. I won't want to get too much into the geography of it because that's not my area. But the Japanese archipelago, that's a whole range of islands in lakes or rivers. The Japanese archipelago, where there's loads of little islands, it's along what they call the Pacific Ring. And the reason why it's called Pacific Ring, because along that ring there's lots of volcanoes. It's the Pacific Ring of Fire. So there's a whole kind of raft of volcanoes. And they're at the margin, what they call the Eurasian, Philippine, and Pacific Plate Tectonic. Those of you who went geology at school, and I did that, there's massive land masses. Sorry, there's massive landmass, and they move. We don't see them moving, but when it gets to the place where one mass of land goes underneath the other, as you can imagine, there's a kind of, and it doesn't have to be much, it could be 2 or 3 centimeters, and there's a kind of vibration that sends everything it sends a vibration, which then anything that's in its pathway is demolished. Now, in Japan, in 1923, they had a massive earthquake in Japan, and the other place was Yokohama. 1923 razed the place to the ground. Over 140,000 people died. They were killed. So they took that as a marker to say that this can never happen again. And one of the things I want to say to all of us as we're listening to, whether it's live or on catch up, but one of the great things is that when we have difficult experiences in our lives, quite often we're quick to move on to the next thing. But what I'm suggesting, as Richard Rohr suggested when he spoke about that, if we don't transform our pain, we'll transmit it. And then he said, before we get rid of our pain, we need to find out what it teaches us, what it can teach us. What the Japanese did, they said, look, this cannot happen again. So designers, architects, structural engineers got together to say, look, what are we going to do? And what I'm suggesting is that when we have these bad experiences in our lives, we take some time to mull over them so that either it never happens again, or if it does, we know how to handle it better. Now, of course, the Japanese cannot stop earthquakes, but they can certainly do a lot to ensure that whatever happened in 1923 doesn't happen again. So, what they did, earthquakes are happening all the time. San Francisco, Japan. The only time we hear about things when it's kind of major. So what the Japanese construction people, the architects, designers, and structural engineers got together, and one of the professors said there's always conflict, but that conflict ensures that whatever's constructed, it actually tests. It stands the test of the earthquake. So there's kind of two levels of resilience that they work for. They work for the kind of low-level resilience where there's earthquake 3 or 4 times in the life of the building, and the idea is the buildings are constructed in such a way that repair is not necessary, or if the repair is really minor. So that's kind of level 1. Level 2 is extreme earthquakes. Then the focus is not so much preserving the building, it's keeping people safe. You know, a nation does not want to go through 140,000 people being killed of a natural disaster, because there's repercussions in terms of the amount of loss, the grief, and so forth. So level 1 is to ensure that buildings can take those minor tremors 3 or 4 times in their lifetime, but also in the larger, the extreme earthquakes, it's not preserving buildings, it's preserving the lives of people. So there's a whole range of stuff what they do. They have rubber blocks, so there's an adaptation of the basement, of the base of the building. There's rubber blocks that they put in the basement. Also, every second floor. So what happens when a building moves? They said it can move up to 5 foot in one direction. So what they do, every second floor, they're putting almost like shock absorbers. So if there is a quake, that these either the blocks of rubber, either in the base or where they have these shock absorbers, they said it's like a bicycle pump, where you'd have a pump where you push air in it, but these things are not filled with air, it's filled with a liquid. So what happens, as I say, that if the building can absorb the vibration, it won't collapse. So they put shock absorbers every second floor, so if there's a quake, the building doesn't move or it doesn't topple over. So these layers, these shock absorbers absorbs the shock, so the building can remain erect. There's also ways of a kind of mesh, that the mesh takes some of the energy, so it prevents other parts of the structure from buckling. So they think about it really well, and they spend a lot of time in ensuring that what goes into construction is really important. And I want us to think that also then, where our lives are concerned, when things happen to us, we shouldn't really need to be going through things half a dozen times before they wake up. One of the things, and even in the world of counseling, sometimes I've met individuals who've gone through 6, 7, 8, 9 relationships. The same thing happens, and you wonder, haven't you yet woke up to smell the coffee? And it's only sometimes in the counseling room, when we sit down and talk and look at some of the patterns and look at what's happening and what can we do, that's sometimes the only time individuals see the patterns of how they are living their lives. So a lot of thought, you can imagine, goes into the construction of these properties. Lots of arguments, but lots of thought around design, developing what materials we're going to use, how we're going to do it. Lots of experimentation. That's the same thing with our lives, and certainly when we're in moral injury, therapy might work for everybody, but somehow people need to work out a way how they can get the help that they need. And one of the things I wanted us to consider, what is it we have as human beings that can help us during difficult times? And you might think, oh, now Delroy has really gone woo-hoo. Is it woo-woo? I certainly haven't. Let's have a look. Nothing here at the moment. Certainly, if you see me on Facebook, you want to ask a question or a comment, please do. Sonia, I don't know if you've got two eyes, one on Facebook, one on YouTube. But if you want to ask a question, please do. Or a comment that's relevant to the topic we're looking at this evening. I'll kind of keep my eye on what's taking place. So I really want to talk about the human spirit. And some folks might say, right, he's really gone off it now. He's really kind of lost the plot. The human spirit, I'm a believer in the human spirit, that within the human being, there's a capacity to do great things. Obviously, there's a capacity to do not so good things, but there's a capacity to do great things. There's a capacity to withstand, unfortunately, some things that we shouldn't have to, but there's a capacity within us that's able to withstand quite a lot. I am a person of faith. Some people know, some people don't. But I believe that every human being has a spirit, whether they consider themselves spiritual or not, or whether we subscribe to a religious belief or not. So what do I mean by the human spirit? Your spirit is that part of you that is not physical, but it consists of your character and feelings. That's one definition, kind of energy. And there's lots of other definitions. Further definitions, a set of innate characteristics of human beings that are durable and universal features of humanity. Viktor Frankl's Search for Meaning talks about the defiant power of the human spirit, refers to the capacity to tap into spiritual dimensions in order to transcend the negative effects, situations, illness, or the influence of the past. The human spirit is our healthy core. What's the core of our being? And you can see, if you understand moral injury, or beginning to understand it, you can see why some people call it soul shattering, because it gets to the very depth of our spirit and of our core of who we are. Gayatri Ramprasad, she talks a little bit about the human spirit, but I've left the link in my newsletter, and she's got a video of an Asian woman doing a TED talk who lost a leg and ended up climbing one of the major mountains in the world. So that's talking about the human spirit, one of determination, one to kind of make it, to persist and to pursue. So if we consider the nature of moral injury and the devastation it can do to us as people, it's no wonder that Jonathan Shea talks about, Jonathan Shea was the psychiatrist who was working with these returnees from the Vietnam War and noticed certain traits. He said it wasn't the PTSD, it wasn't the horrors of war, it wasn't the loss of their friends or buddies, but he said it was something far more deeper, something existential that was boiling up inside of them. And it was that thing that led many of them to take their own lives. So this whole thing around moral injury. So what can we do as human beings to strengthen the human spirit? Talking to a friend recently who logged on to what I've been doing, and when I asked her about her way of coping, she had a counselor, she had a psychologist, and she had a spiritual coach. And I said, what's with the spiritual coach? Oh, I think she had a masseur as well. She did yoga. There's a whole range of things. So I said, what's the spiritual coach? She said, the spiritual coach is to work on what the others have missed. So I really love that. There was now, of course, you could have somebody who's a therapist, counselor, psychologist, who not necessarily are people of faith, but they are open to the idea of the spiritual dimension of us as human beings. There's a very good friend of mine, a clinical psychologist, an English woman, who was very open to other cultures and their understanding of the spirit world and how people got strength and whatever they needed and part of their well-being from spiritual interaction and so forth. She was very open to it, but many of her colleagues weren't, and she had quite a warm time in the place where she was working, because she just idea was simply this: just because we don't understand things doesn't mean to say that we should poo-poo it, but we should try to understand what meaning does this person get from whatever they're experiencing. So the spiritual coach is a person who runs their own coaching business, but they help people with spiritual matters and get other areas of their lives in order. So that's kind of a spiritual coach. It's a legitimate thing. People can train for it. It's not somebody who happens to do coaching and is interested in spirituality, or somebody who has a particular faith perspective. No, you can actually train to become a spiritual coach. I suppose that's the kind of secular version. And I guess. Oh, good evening, Tina. Really good to see you this evening. Finally made it on Facebook, on Facebook. Really good to see you. If you want to drop in a comment, please do. So yeah, looking at moral injury. Recovering from moral injury, shaken but not broken. So we understand, certainly the people I've spoken to, to talk about it, rock them is an understatement. People on antidepressants, people have to leave, people 2-3 years after being kicked out of the place still haven't been able to hold down a full-time job. It really is something that I'm not even passionate about it now. It's something that's really got a hold of me, because it can wreck people's lives. If you're here watching for the first time, I think I've shared with somebody, a friend of mine, who didn't know there was a language for it, about some of the stuff that people experience at work. And some of you have indicated to me that you didn't know there was a language for what you've experienced at work. And he said his mother was doing really, really well back in the 70s, 80s, doing really, really well in a particular profession. And things happened, and it was a case of moral injury. And he said, Delroy, from that day, my mother has never driven again. It just bashed the confidence out of her. And I guess back in those days, you wouldn't have gone to see a counselor or therapist or psychologist. You would have just kind of toughed it out. And he said to this day, she's never, ever driven again. So what's some of the things that we can do? Remember, I spoke about stirring. And one of the things, when we go through a crisis, what it does, it causes us to be open to things that we wouldn't normally think about or even consider. In a sense, it's an opportunity for great learning. And quite often that depends on the therapist that you're with, one who is open to exploring, because that's what you're doing. You're exploring, because you're now actually learning to become who you are. And certainly, if you've been doing things to please other people, to please family, now for the first time, maybe you're experiencing something that's real and new. I recall when I was training as a psychotherapist that we were talking about people having nervous breakdowns. And I remember my tutor saying something to me then. So we're talking about 30 odd years ago now. And she said to me, Delroy, she said, for some people, the nervous breakdown is the best thing that's ever happened. And if you've known anybody who's had a nervous breakdown, you know how horrible it can be. So I said to her, what do you mean? She said, it is an opportunity to rebuild your life on a firm foundation. Because quite often when people have nervous breakdowns, it's because they've been, in a sense, putting on a facade, living a life or a persona that isn't real. But the breakdown in good hands means that the person can get the support they need and rebuild their life on a solid foundation, firm foundation. Overnight job? Absolutely not. Takes time? Absolutely does. In terms of the person rebuilding, reconstructing their values, reshaping their values to get a sense of what they really believe. It's a long old journey, but it's worth the wait. I think making meaning, I think I read something tonight on my feed. Making meaning is hard. It's hard, yes, it is. It's meant to be. But coming through the other side of it, you don't leave, you don't come out as the same person. So what can you do? So you might want to consider seeing a transpersonal psychotherapist. This is one who bridges the gap between the spiritual dimensions and uses psychological framework and theory to kind of bridge the gap to help the individual, you, the client, to understand what's kind of taking place. Number two, when our lives have been disrupted, it is natural to find to want to find order, safety, familiarity. Who wouldn't? But at that moment in time, cheers, Tina. Good to see you on YouTube as well. But at that time, it's a possibility to explore. And I know we want to get some of us want to go up to the next thing. No, if you're in a position where you can just stay a while and explore, discover. You are traveling, you're traversing terrain in your life that you've never traversed before. And if the truth be known, you needed to, but you didn't because you're so busy doing other things. Number 3, if you've never considered the notion of the human spirit before, now is the time to do it. Your life is up in the air. It came the right time to do some, I call it inner excavation, some inner archaeology, some stuff that you buried years ago, decades ago. It's time to revisit it, to see, even though you think it's dead, but it's kind of grown life inside of you. So it's time for that inner archaeology, inner excavation. You can do that with a therapist. You can do that being a part of a community group or a support group, or talking to 2 or 3 trusted friends, or spending time with pen and paper, beginning to write down what you're experiencing. And maybe at some point after you've done the pen and paper, you've done the community thing, and maybe then you want to see a therapist just to kind of work through some other deeper issues, enabling you to kind of move forward. Be open to the fact that when you're going through, in terms of your recovery, be open to the fact that you're shaken, be open to the fact that maybe it is a life transition. Well, no, it's not maybe, it is a life transition. There's no way you can experience moral injury and there's no transition in your life. There's no way you can experience moral injury and when you recover that you're the same person. It's impossible. It's a bit like saying when a nation has had an earthquake, 20, 30, 40 years, that nation is not the same. Buildings are different. Streets are different. The way of working, the way of dealing with disaster is different. There's no way that you can remain the same. Business as usual. Here's some of my concluding thoughts. Moral injury will leave you, definitely will leave you shaken and stirred, but hopefully not broken. That's another session I'll be looking at. Your human spirit is capable of so much, and the devastating blow of moral injury may ultimately act as an unexpected door of your life opening, leading to an unexpected pathway. If you choose to follow it, will lead you down the place that you should have gone years ago but didn't, or there'll be an unexpected pathway that leads you to a newer life, a more interesting life, one of adventure and so forth. In the words of Robert Frost, that great poem, The Road Less Taken, he said, the 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled, and that has made all the difference. So I wish you well, wishing well and working towards you for the best for you. Listen, if you want to, more than happy, here's my contact details through my website and my email. More than happy for you to book a initial free consultation. Send me an email. We can get it arranged. I think I've got something happening in the next few days. More than happy to have a conversation with you to see how I can help you. That's what I really want to do. Those of you who've experienced moral injury, you've known people who have, you know that, for want of a better word, it's insidious. Oh, Heather, yeah, good evening to you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, got you. Yes, I'm going to say to my friend that normally asks questions that I'm back up on Facebook. So I think, I did put a note out. So can you just, those of you watching, if you saw the note during the week, can you just let me know that you saw it? So at least it just means that I might have to keep doing it on a regular basis. So I did send out an announcement during the week. If you did see it, just let me know. And I'll be gracious. So if you want a free consultation, how can I help you? Please contact me through my website or my email address, and let's take it from there. So wishing you well. Thank you for your time, and if you watched on catch up, thank you. If you're new, welcome, and if you found it helpful, please feel to share with friends who may be going through the same thing. You're kind of noticing over the weeks you've been listening to this and you see some of the signs of moral injury before things get too bad, there's enough material that you can help your friend weather the storm or to leave before it gets too late. So wishing you well, go well, take care, enjoy the rest of your night and your week. All the best now. Bye-bye.